Alright, so you should have turned in your homework, but you also should have written down a few problems that you might have had some issues with. I'm not going to go through every single problem, but I will go through a few of these to help you out. So hopefully the ones that I go through are some of the ones that you had some issues with. The first 4 questions here, you were supposed to write a verbal expression for each algebraic expression. So you're supposed to change this essentially into words. So I am going to start with number 2 here on this one. You have r to the 4th power divided by 9. So one way to write that as words is to say a number to the 4th power, and I'm going to abbreviate 4th right here to make this a little bit easier. A number to the 4th power divided by 9. So notice if you can actually read what it says, r to the 4th power divided by 9, that also helps you to get your verbal expression. The second one here is 2 times, and it's the third one by the way, sorry, a number. We don't know what that number is, that's why we're just saying a number. 2 times a number plus 6. Now you could also, if you wanted to, you could write the number 2 here and the number 6 here. That would be okay. You could also take this and say 6 more than 2 times a number, because whenever you say 6 more than something, it is adding 6 to something. This one here, I'm going to say it, but I'm not going to write it down on the screen, would be a number to the 4th power multiplied by another number to the 3rd power. Notice we said a number and then we said another number because I have 2 different variables there. So that is translating from mathematical expressions into verbal expressions, or putting it in words basically. The next section was a little bit different. The next section you are looking at writing the algebraic expression, which basically looks like this, for each verbal expression. So one thing to remember is that when you look at algebraic expressions in particular, they don't have equal signs or less than or greater than signs. So technically 15 down here, we'll talk about it, is not one of these problems. I should have put a little space in between there. But each one of these is an expression, which means it is going to look like 1 through 4 that doesn't have an equal sign or doesn't have an inequality symbol. So let's take a look at a couple of these. One that probably gave some people some issues was number 5. X more than 7. It's not X is more than, that's totally different. The is word makes it very different. X more than 7 means I am adding X to 7. It's X, which represents a number, more than 7. So if I said it was 3 more than 7, you would take 7 plus 3. If I said it was 9 more than 7, you would take 7 plus 9. So when I say X more than 7, I mean I'm adding X to 7. It just means I do not know what that number is. A number less 35. A number, you could use X again, or if you wanted to use A, you could, minus 35. A number less 35. It's kind of a weird way to say it, but that means you're taking away 35 from a number. All right, let's switch down to number 8. I know I had a few people ask me about this in class. 1/3 of a number. 1/3 of a number means 1/3 times a number, 1/3 X. You could also put parentheses around the X if you wanted to. If you wanted it to look like this, that would be okay. But 1/3 of a number means multiply. A lot of times when you see that, especially in reference to a fraction, 1/3 of something, that is typically when you are multiplying. The other one that people were asking about a little bit in class, the quotient, remember, means division. The quotient of 45 and R means 45 divided by R. Take a look at number 12. 18 decreased by 3 times D. So 18 is decreased by, or subtract, 3 times D. 3 times D would be 3D. Squared means squaring something to the second power, k squared minus 11. So you're breaking it down. You've got the variable, you've got the power, the squared, minus 11. And I'm just transferring that into all these parts that I see over here in my expression. So the last one in this group here really doesn't belong in this group. It actually kind of goes with the next section a little bit with finding out some word problem stuff because of one major word that you see here. Is. The volume of a cylinder, that's volume, is means equals pi times the radius, which is r, squared, multiplied by the height. So notice it's pi times the radius multiplied by the height. Now technically I could have just said pi times the radius times the height, but I wanted you to make sure that you understand that multiplied by and times still means multiplication between all of these. So this would be the equation. The reason it's an equation is because of this major word right here, is. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. The next one says a certain smartphone family plan costs $55 per month plus additional usage cost. If X is the number of cell phone minutes used above the plan amount, and Y is the number of megabytes of data used above the plan amount, interpret the following expressions. So we'll start with the first one. This is not multiple choice. So what is 0.25 times X? Well, remember, X is the number of cell phone minutes used above the plan amount. So what does that mean? That means for every minute you go above the plan amount, it is 25 cents per minute above what you are allowed in the plan. Well, what does 2 times Y mean? Y is the number of megabytes of data used above the plan amount. So what does 2 mean? Well, that would be $2 per megabyte above the plan amount. I'm going to put plan on this one and plan on this one. So this expression and this expression are explaining how the family plan, the company that's giving the plan, would figure out what you owe if you go over your usage. Then what does the final expression talk about? Well, it has the 25 cents times X, or times the number of minutes above the plan. It has the 2 times Y, or $2 times the number of megabytes used above the plan amount. But it also has the 55. Well, what was the 55? That was the cost per month for the plan. So you have the cost of going above on the minutes, the cost of going above on your megabyte usage, and the cost of the plan. So what does this all represent? This would be the cost of everything in a month, including anything you went over and the original plan cost. So let's say you didn't go over. You didn't go over any of them. your minutes, or your usage of your data. If you went 0 and 0 here, it would just be the original price, 55. The overage cost only comes into play if you go over. All right, so the last thing we're going to look at is a little bit of this little section on translating each sentence into an equation. This is where you have equal signs, and it will say is equal to, or is. Sometimes it'll just say is. Okay? So I'm going to take a look just at a couple of these. 3 times r less than 15 equals 6, excuse me. So notice right here, I can go ahead and say equals 6. 3 times r, that tells me I'm going to have 3r. But it is less than 15. But be careful, it is not is less than 15. It says 3r less than 15, which means you're taking 15 and you're subtracting 3r from it. You have that much less than 15 that was originally there. It's kind of like saying 15 is your beginning amount here, and you're taking away that 3r because you want 3r less than the 15 you started with. Equals 6. Then you have this one, number 20. A number n squared plus 12 is the same as, which that just means equals, right? The quotient of p and 4. So let's start on this side. A number n, so n squared plus 12 is the same as, there's my equals, the quotient of, which means division, p and 4, or p divided by 4. So I hope me going through some of these problems have kind of helped you out a little bit on your homework questions if you had some. I know I didn't go through all of them, but if you have any major issues, you can ask me. Come back and see me. If you need any extra help, I'm there to help you. So the next thing that we're going to take a look at is I am going to kind of skim through and review a couple of other things that are going to be on your test next time. Your test review sheet will be handed to you as soon as you finish watching the video by the substitute teacher. So you'll have all class to work on your review sheet, and if you do your review sheet, you'll get to have bonus points on the test. Alright, so in the first part of the chapter, we talked about what a variable is. You'll see on your review sheet, you need to know that a variable is a letter that represents one or more numbers. It's not just a letter, it's not just a missing number, but it's both. It's a letter that represents one or more numbers. An expression involving variables is called an algebraic expression. Remember, algebraic expressions we talked about that they have a collection of numbers, variables, and operations. So you have things like 2x plus 6, 2 times x plus 6. You have a variable, you have numbers, you have operations like multiplication and addition. Remember though, before you get too far into this, remember we talked about how you really can't add these two together, because we also talked about something later called like terms. So what we did was we did a few things with variables, substituting numbers in by plugging in the number for the variable, like plugging in -2 for A, plugging in -3 for B, and doing the math and figuring out your answers. Same thing with problems like this, like plugging in your number for X and then finding the answer. So you have a few of those when you get to your test. We also talked about multiplying and adding and subtracting with variables. We talked about how when you are adding and subtracting, you have to have like terms. So one of the first things we did was we talked about a term being something that's separated by a plus sign. In other words, when you have negative 9 minus 2x, that's the same thing as negative 9 plus negative 2x, doing that leave, change, change. This is one term here. This is another term here. And so one of the things we said was if you're going to add things together, you have to have like terms. Terms that have the same variable raised to the same exponent. The coefficient is what you actually add together when you combine like terms. You really just add the coefficients. You don't really do anything to the variables when you're adding and subtracting. So then we just went through and we practiced a few of those. We did things like this. 5x plus 2x is 7x. Remember, 5 plus 2 would be 7. You just leave the x alone because it's just like terms. You can still use your calculator if you need to. I hope you don't need it a lot for things like 5 plus 2, but you can if you need to. Then we got into some that had multiple like terms, like 15x and 9x would be 24x. 3 and 5 would be 8. But these two right here are not like terms. All three of these would be, and we would add up 32 plus 5 plus 18, and you would end up with 55x. So, sorry. We talked about adding like terms together. Then we talked about multiplying with variables. Multiplying with variables is very different than when you are adding and subtracting. When you multiply 2x times 3x, it's 6 because 2 times 3 is 6, and then x times x is x squared. Remember, we kind of took a little shortcut there. We said just basically count the variables up. But remember, this is when you are multiplying, not addition. So make sure you realize that it's okay for me to take this, even though these are not like terms. I can multiply 4 times 9 and get 36. X times x, there's 2 of them, that's x squared. And then y, just alphabetical order on your variables. You can multiply anything you want together, you just can't add and subtract it unless it has the same variable and the same exponent on the variable. So you have to know the difference between multiplying and adding. I can't help you with that other than trying to practice it with you over and over again. You have to actually know in your head when you're multiplying and when you're adding, and the differences between those rules. Remember, we also talked about multiplying things and dividing things that have multiple variables in them. Remember, with dividing, you had some canceling out, like 64 divided by 8 is 8. X to the 4th on the top and x squared on the bottom. 4 minus 2 would be x squared because 2 of them are going to cancel out. And then the y is still on the bottom by itself. Remember, the reason this cancels out is x to the 4th really means x times x times x times x. X squared really means x times x. 2 of them are going to cancel, and x times x is x squared. Remember, only cancel out if you have multiplication between all these things. Don't start canceling out when you have plus and minus, like we had with a couple of these, where you divided. 3 divided by 3 is 1x. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. You don't just cancel out the 3's on this one. 4 divided by 2 would be 2x. 16 divided by 2 would be 8, so minus 8. Also notice that when I get that answer, I don't try to add them together because they're not like terms. Make sure you understand where like terms are. All right. The only other major thing that we did in this chapter was the distributive property before we collected like terms. So when we had something like this, we said 2 times 6x is 12x, 2 times 10 is 20. Please make sure you realize the distributive property, again, is multiplying. It is not adding, and you can't add these together. 12x and 20 are not like terms. This one has an x, this one doesn't. Same thing with 6x and 10 at the very beginning. I can't add those together. So the distributive property was multiplying. We did have some that got a little more complicated sometimes, like this. 2y times 5y would be 10y squared, because 2 times 5 is 10. Y times y is y squared. Again, you are multiplying. 2y times negative 8 would be negative 16y. Notice, yes, both of these have a y, but this is y squared, this is y to the first. So you still cannot add these together. That means you're done. With simplifying, the big key is you don't want to take it too far. The only other thing I had you watching out for with the distributive property is when you were distributing a negative. So if we saw something like this guy, let's see if I can find him. There's some distributive negatives, but I'm looking for, here we go. One's like this guy right here. This is 6 minus 2 times this. Be careful, because it's not 6 minus 2 first. The order of operations tells me I need to do my multiplying first. But also I need to be careful because it's not just 6, 2 that I'm multiplying, but a negative 2. So what is negative 2 times 7x? That's negative 14x. Negative 2 times positive 2? That's negative 4. Again, you can use your calculator to help you with the numbers if you need to. Then, after I've multiplied, then I can see if there's anything I can add. Well, here's a 6, and here's a negative 4. 6 minus 4 would be positive 2, or 2. If you do put the 2 in front like this, that's okay. It's just a good habit to start putting the variable terms first in that order. So that was some of the major things that we talked about in this chapter, dealing with variables and expressions and equations. So now what you're going to do is you're going to have a review sheet to work over some review problems for your test. Remember, not only is it getting you ready for your test, but it is also helping you by giving you bonus points on the test. Please take it seriously and work hard on it.